Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So someone told me that I hadn't spoken about long distance relationships, right? So I have not talked about long distance relationships yet. It's one of those topics that I probably was going to get to, but since I was reminded that I hadn't made any videos on long distance relationships, that's going to be today's topic. Today I'm going to talk to you about long distance relationships and things that you have to take into consideration if you are thinking about getting into a long distance relationship, or perhaps if you're currently in a long distance relationship. They can be really challenging, right? They can be really challenging. They could go really smooth or they could be really challenging. So that's today's discussion. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe now. I would really appreciate it if you do that. Don't forget to share and hit the like button. Those two things help the channel grow, so I'll really appreciate it if you do that as well. Leave your comments down below and turn on your post notifications. All right, so let's talk long distance relationships. So there are a couple different ways to look at this whole idea of long distance relationships. Let me start with long distance relationships that can be easier, or perhaps they're supposed to be easier. And those are the relationships where people have the relationship did not start as a long distance relationship, right? So this is a situation where people, lived in the same area, that sort of stuff, and were constantly together, right? They always saw each other, or at least several times a week, a month, or whatever the case is. So their relationship started on a more of a face-to-face type of situation, even though it perhaps started online. Maybe they met online in some app or website or whatever the case is, but they were in the same region, right? Within the same proximity, within a decent proximity of each other. So they were able to see each other on a regular basis, right? So they've developed a relationship. Let's say they're now in a committed relationship, or they've gotten married, or they're just dating, living together, whatever you call it. And this has been going on for a while, yeah, right? So let's say maybe a year or two or three or four or whatever the case is. So they're in a relationship, right? And these people have been able to interact with each other, and they're used to each other. And then let's say someone moves for work, right? And that's typically what you would see, is that somebody would move away from where they live for employment reasons or something like that, right? Those long distance relationships have a tendency to be more successful, in that a lot of times the person's moved away for a short space of time and they're moving back, or it's a situation where one person's moving and the other person eventually moves at the same time. I'll see a lot of times like one person gets a job somewhere and the other person moves with them and finds a job, or so a lot of times those are the easier ones to work. The challenge is, though, sometimes someone might not want to move, right? They might be in a situation where career wise it might be really difficult for the person to be able to just give up the career or whatever it is that they've established, and that presents a challenge in the relationship. Now if that person doesn't want to leave their career and all that they've established, because maybe the area they're moving to and the situation they're moving into doesn't provide the same set of opportunities after they've spent a while to build up where they are. And so that now comes a challenge in that relationship when it comes to people who, they've been around each other, they've met face to face, but one person has to move for family reasons or for, other types of reasons or whatever the case is. And so you would see that challenge present itself in situations like that. So it's not easy, right? It's not easy. So it really just comes down to, does the other person want to move, since this person's going to move for work or whatever the case is, that sort of stuff. And then there has to be obviously a lot of communication, a lot of talking, a lot of, right? But the reason why these relationships tend to be more successful is that they have a ground they kind of have some kind of ground to stand on. It didn't begin as a long distance relationship, right? They actually have developed a foundation. That's the word I was looking for. They've developed the relationship has developed a foundation, and so there's something for them to build on, continue to build on, continue to grow on. And it's not like you don't know the person who's, or you've never lived around the person, right? And but again, as I say, sometimes somebody doesn't want to move or whatever the case is, and that could present a lot of problems in a relationship, and you see it. The other type of long distance relationship is where it begins as a long distance relationship. Now that is challenging. All right, that's really challenging. So if someone is in, let's say, one part of the U.S., the other person is another part of the U.S. So someone is in pick a state, Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. They live in the city of Philadelphia, and they meet someone online, and they're dating someone who lives in pick another state, North Carolina, right? The person lives in Charlotte, city of Charlotte. And so you have these two people who are obviously hundreds of miles apart, and they meet. Now, that is a challenging relationship because at some point in time, if one person doesn't move and they don't agree to move to one location, that relationship, 99% of the times, it's just not going to work, right? Because as human beings, we like the fact that we're able to. There's something about touch, right? There's something about touch, and the ability to be intimate. And when I say intimate, I don't mean sex, but intimate in terms of to be able to share the same space, the same level of comfort, that sort of stuff with another person. And when that is absent on a regular basis for too long, people get lonely, right? And then you see other challenges start to emerge in the relationship, and sometimes they just fade away. They just fade away because the person lives too long away. I mean, even 2 hours could present a challenge. But imagine if two people live in two completely separate states, and they're not like on the edge of each state right next to each other. So it could present a real challenge in terms of how do you develop that level of intimacy and all that type of stuff. Now, look, a lot of research says, and I've read a lot of it, talks about the fact that technology does make up for a lot of that stuff these days. I agree, right? You can have a lot of interactions and you can really communicate with someone in a really effective way using technology, not just hearing them, but seeing them and all that type of stuff, versus, 20, 30 years ago or something like that. But still, at some point, there must be some kind of decision in terms of at what point are we going to be together and when I say that, I mean, at what point are we going to be in the same space? At what point are we going to occupy or share the same space? And so there has to be some kind of goal to eventually move towards doing that, or that relationship is probably just not going to last. So for the most part, I have seen most long distance relationships don't work. They do take a tremendous amount of communication and dedication, but I've also seen a lot of long distance relationships be really successful. So it depends on who are the individuals involved, who are the two people involved in that relationship, and just how bad they want to strive to make that relationship work. Or else, as I said, it could be really difficult when you have people who are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles apart. So, one person's in Philadelphia, the other person is in Charlotte. That's a really long distance. And then finances and all that kind of stuff could come in together. If the both individuals don't have money to be able to move back and forth and all that kind of stuff, I mean, that's going to play a factor. It's one thing if you have money and you can travel, say, like every other weekend or whatever. Okay, you're seeing the person. But what if you're not seeing him more than like 2 or 3 times a year? Then that makes that relationship really, really difficult. And so I've seen some people go into long distance relationships being pretty naive, thinking that, I guess the love that they had for each other at that time was just going to win through. Well, love is good and win through in terms of it's going to power them through the distance. And that is good, and I don't want to encourage that, but you also got to be realistic as well, right? There's got to be, at some point, you and this person have got to be able to merge back into the same space, because ultimately, if you're not in the same space, look, I've seen it. People are going to go off and do their own thing. You know, I've seen so many husbands go off and do their own thing because their wife doesn't live in the same state or whatever the situation is, and wives go off and do their own things because their husband don't live in the same, and everybody has their own individual life, you know, because they're so far apart. So there's a lot to take into consideration when it comes to long distance relationships. It's very difficult. It can work, but it's a serious challenge, and you can't be naive going into it, right? It really just comes down to those two individuals and the ability to communicate, and ultimately, what's going to make it really give you a good chance of that relationship working is if the two of you have a goal and you're moving towards that goal of eventually being in the same space. Because if you're never going to be in the same space, then what kind of relationship really is it? And that's something you got to really be honestly ask yourself, and you ask each other if you're trying to form a serious relationship for the long term, right? So I just wanted to talk about those things, some of those challenges that I see, that I have seen pose themselves when it comes to long distance relationships. Let me know what are some other things that you think, you know, you have to take into consideration. I might do another video on this as well, so I'll love to hear from you. Again, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to turn on your post notifications, so hit the post notification bell. Please don't forget to share and like the video. Those two things help the channel grow, so I'll really appreciate it if you do that. And also, don't forget to leave your comments and any suggestions for future videos. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch, and until next time, peace.